carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever, and may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that. Face value. When I tell people that my mother was a white Englishwoman and my father Igbo, they look at me skeptically. It's a pause that means, are you sure? You're really dark. It's a pause I've heard only in the West. In Nigeria, most people know upon meeting me that I'm not entirely African. Nigeria has a long history of foreigners coming through: the Portuguese in the 14th century, North Africans as far back as the 12th century, Tuaregs and Fulani, to name just a few. In fact, in the late 80s and 90s, the civil war in Chad caused very light-skinned Chadians to pour into Nigeria as refugees. It was a disturbing sight to see hundreds, sometimes thousands of homeless Arab-looking people begging for food in the streets and markets. The public outcry was so severe that the military government began a program of forced repatriation. Army trucks rolled into markets, and soldiers would round up these refugees, separating families without a second thought. After all, they all looked alike, and drove them back across the border. I once found myself being pushed into one such truck, but my fluency in several Nigerian languages saved me. I was often confused for being Lebanese, Indian, Arab, or Fulani, but not in England or America. In these places, I am firmly black, if of unknown origin. But people have learned to be polite here, so no one says anything that might offend. They nod and make murmuring noises instead, except the LAPD, whose officers took great offense at my still very English accent when I arrived in LA, and always asked me why I was faking it, and could I please step out of the car? It is interesting that I would be suspected of lying about my mixed-race heritage, as though I was seeking some privilege, some betterment of my black lot, because, well, everyone knows some white in you is better than none, right? Wrong. When we were kids in London, my mother was often congratulated for adopting us. It still amazes me that she never grew tired of correcting people, and not always kindly. In the 90s, I was standing next to my mother at an ATM in London, and we were chatting as she withdrew money. A policeman wandered over very casually and asked if she was okay and if I was trying to rob her. And one of my agents, on meeting my mother at an award ceremony here in Los Angeles, exclaimed to me, "Oh my God, Christopher, she's as white as day." Frantz Fanon has written better than I ever will about this matter. The idea of whiteness and a visible whiteness being preferred. The idea that secretly all white people believe that everyone really wants to look like them, to be them. Growing up in Nigeria, my brother Greg was very light-skinned, and of all of us, he had the longest, straightest hair. Mbulu Jesus, my aunt would say, which loosely translates to, he's just like Jesus. The nickname stuck for such a long time, and when I was out and about with Greg, we were quite the picture. Greg, skinny with long hair, me, plump with kinky hair. And in the usual way of people in Africa, they would ask, "Whose children are you?" And we would respond. And they would say, "Same mother, same father?" And we would say, "Yes." And they would look at me with a mix of pity and mockery and say, "So what happened to you?" Face value. When I lived in Los Angeles, East Los Angeles, a predominantly Chicano Latino neighborhood, I was assumed to be Dominican or Panamanian. In Miami, where I go regularly for religious reasons, I'm confused for a Cuban. In Australia, I was an Aborigine. In New Zealand, I'm Maori. In Egypt, I'm Nubian. In Qatar, I'm Pakistani. In South Africa, I'm Zulu, or some such other group. Other times, because my accent, which is a mix of Nigerian and British and now American inflections, I'm always also assumed to be from one of the islands. No one accepts my Nigerianness, not without argument. In fact, the two things that I have rarely been taken for, Nigerian or white, and white, are the very things that form my DNA. Face value. As my father used to say to me in his heavy Igbo accent, which he adopted when he was particularly disgusted with the way my face was set in rebellion, he would say, "From your face to your toes, you're such a disappointment." Even my grandfather, who cast cola nuts when I was born and nicknamed me Erosi for spirit, would shake his head and say, "You don't belong here or in the land of spirits. You're a bat, neither bird nor mammal." I love that. That meant I could be anything, even Batman. Lavender. For years, there was a scar under my bottom lip, one I wore with pride. When I was maybe 4, I fell running in a park in Burnham and drove my top teeth between my bottom lip. There was blood everywhere. And as I trembled in shock, a kind and suave Englishman with a cane picked me up and pressed his pocket square that smelled of lavender to my wound. "Who's a brave chap?" he asked. "Brave chaps don't cry, all right, old boy?" I nodded, pressing the square of fabric to my chin as my mother came rushing up. As she grew frantic, the man put his hand on her shoulder and said, "It's all right, he's a real gentleman. Gentlemen are always all right." And then he was gone. Every time I try to summon his face, all I see are pocket squares, a gold signet ring and a cane, and there is also always the lingering smell of lavender. I didn't know this, but for years this was the shape of my yearning for a different father from the one I had. I was 18 months old when we fled Biafra and had no memory of my father. Still, I must have been searching for him, and I found him in that scar and that smell. The scars on the back of his right hand that he told me was caused by shrapnel from a grenade he caught when he tried to save a small child, which my mother later told me he got in a drunken fight with his brother. These were the same scars I sank my teeth into drawing blood when he slapped me for the first time. I was 5. That bite earned me a left hook to the side of my head, but it was worth it to know I left a mark on him. The next day I lost 3 milk teeth. It's an endless bargain of violence and love. Truce. But who can say in the end what love is? Is it my father saying the words, "I love you"? Is it the ice cream he would buy us as a treat and forget in the car while he sat drinking beer in the bar? The same ice cream he would bring home, now a bowl of sugary milk, and wake us up to eat in the light of the flickering storm lanterns, even though it is still full of red ants from the car, even though we had to pull them out, rubbing their corpses into a red blur on napkins, careful not to ingest them. Is that the measure of love? Or a hand striking your face, or a ring drawing blood when you were rude, a stunning blow to protect you from finding blows later in life that might kill you, a stunning blow that aggregates over time with other blows, physical and verbal, to make you reckless in the world, like that moment in the bar in Benin City when I broke that bottle to menace a gangster, and he said, "You broke that bottle for me," and languidly and smiling, he drew the bottle up with his own arm, cutting a 3-inch gash, and said to me, "See this, this is the least I will do to you." I suppose that too is a kind of love.